My name is Allan Mestel. I'm a photographer. I specialize in portrait and documentary work, specifically the documentary work that focuses on human rights and social justice issues. I have a show right now at SPAACES Gallery. The title is No Justice, No Peace, and it is a compilation of work that I've done over the past few years, primarily with Black Lives Matter street action. And it's both here in Southwest Florida and elsewhere in the country. My work photographing for progressive action groups grew out of the protests that happened in the streets subsequent to the Trump election, 2016, where there was a tremendous amount of backlash from the progressive community, from the left, about the election of Trump and what we anticipated happening with some of the policies that he was promoting. The anti-immigration platform. He's enacted a number of socially repressive policies, and it started pretty much straight after the election. So there was a lot of street action that happened, and I wanted to participate, and I figured the best way I could is to utilize what talent I have as a photographer for the benefit of the resistance community. So I began to go to rallies, photographing them, and then I would post images online, and I gave permission for certain progressive groups to utilize some of my images to promote their events and that sort of thing. And that's how I became involved in the progressive community, the resistance community in Sarasota and Bradenton locally. And of course, Black Lives Matter was a big part of that. So I began to make connections with that organization as they grew to trust me, seeing me at a number of events, and so we just became I became an ally, a trusted ally to the BLM movement and group. In terms of my process, I have a specific way that I photograph large events and large rallies and that sort of thing. Without getting too technical, I shoot with a very shallow depth of field, whether it be long lens or wide angle lens, because I find the most effective way to photograph large crowds and large rallies is to find some sort of focal point in the chaos. And so I like to try and separate out some specific element, some image, some person, something that I constantly have the camera to my eye. I'm scanning the crowd, and I usually just move around until I have some defocused background, some defocused foreground, and some specific image that I like in sharp focus, so that you're not seeing a massive massive crowd. You're really seeing individual faces and that sort of thing. And that's just a technique I've developed over time. I also have a way of shooting moving protests, where I will get to the head of a crowd, turn around, face them, and just let them flow past me, and just scan as they're going with my camera to try and find those specific images. It's a very dynamic process. Clearly, I have to do it. It's something that happens on the fly. So my shooting ratio is pretty high in terms of images that I shoot versus images that I finish. But that's essentially how I do it. If you look at all of my images, you can clearly see that I'm in the midst of the action, because in order to get the kinds of images that I like, it's absolutely necessary to be inside of whatever is happening. It's safer and it's easier to stand, if you're photographing a crowd, stand on the sidewalk as it flows past you. But you're not going to get those dynamic images that really, capture something that is arresting, unless you're in it. So not only am I often standing in a crowd as it flows past me and scanning to find those images, I like to shoot low because it makes my subject just look a little bit more sort of heroic when you're shooting from below rather than straight. So I'm often kneeling and letting the crowd flow past me. You know, as I'm doing it, as I'm shooting when I'm doing it, I'm not really thinking about, you know, how, I just do it and it works. I've never had any issues with, you know, with feeling as though I was in some sort of jeopardy by doing that, unless I'm shooting the other side. I have been at you know, I do sometimes shoot rallies, the right-wing rallies, and that's a whole different story. The curation is difficult because of the number of images that I've collected over the years. I finish my images both in color and black and white when I'm editing, although I did, for this particular show, select only black and white images because of the, you know, black and white I find to be inherently dramatic. I picked images from a variety of different time periods of protest just to give a selection. Some of these images went back to, you know, early in the protest, back to 2016, all the way up to 2021 when I was in Minnesota for the Chauvin trial, and also I was in Brooklyn Center, Minnesota, for the protest that happened after Dante Wright was shot by Kim Potter. In terms of the selection of particular images, just favorites, really. The intent, of course, is to project and to communicate the passion, the energy, the commitment, the anger that I perceive when I'm at these protests. I try to pick images that are representative of what the tone of the protest was, you know, and so that people can look at these images and get some sort of visceral sense of what the emotions of the subject are, and communicate some of that. And in most of these cases, it was anger. It was anger. So photography for me was a very natural thing because my father was a cinematographer. My brother became a cinematographer. And I started very, very early. I was about 11 or 12 years old. My dad would come home with short ends of cans of film that were, where the rolls were too small to be used in, you know, in the film business from whatever job he was on. Normally they're just thrown out, but he would bring them home for me. So I set up a little dark room in my grandmother's hall closet, and I started loading my own cassettes and developing my own film and printing my own images. At 11, 12 years old, I stole my mother's box Brownie camera, and I would shoot hundreds of images because the film was free, so it was fantastic, and I was doing all the developing myself. I subsequently went into the film business myself. I followed my father. I became an editor and director, and that's how I spent most of my working life. Photography was a hobby. I was a street photographer. Street photography was more of a hobby, and it wasn't actually until I moved down to Florida, 2014, when I actually decided to set up my studio and start doing photography as a money-making endeavor full-time. Photography for me, there's, you know, they talk about, it's often said, photography is finding the definitive moment. I've always been drawn to and have books full of iconic photographs that have become so pivotal as images of a particular era, you know, especially in the human rights and social justice. The images of the dead student at Kent State and the woman kneeling beside the body with that look of anguish on her face. that was one that, you know, that one image says so much about a period of time. And I think it's really critical to memorialize what's happening right now. And that's why I spent so much time in the streets. Built up a library of images, because these images, at some point, looking back on this, you know, will be representative of a moment in a critical juncture in American history. I do believe that the country right now is at a crucial crossroads, and that I am concerned how things will turn out. Don't know how this situation between left and right is ever going to resolve itself. I think the far right is becoming increasingly prone to violence and anti-democratic. And I will continue to photograph, you know, indefinitely, because I want to memorialize as best I can. I'm not saying that any of my images will become iconic. It'd be nice. But, you know, for me to be able to have an exhibition like this allows people to look at images that really are representative of some of the most important things that are happening in this country right now. I would invite everyone to try and come and see this exhibit. I think it's an important exhibit at the SPAACES Foundation, which is a nonprofit. I think it's critical to support nonprofits generally, and especially in the arts. It gives a platform and visibility to those of us who are working in, especially in things like this, like photographing progressive action, photographing border issues, BLM issues, things that would perhaps be too controversial for a purely commercial venture to be willing to present. So I'm very grateful that I'm able to show this work. The fact is that a lot of it is controversial. You know, there are signs that I've photographed that represent some very extreme attitudes that would be prevalent in the Black community towards the police, without saying the words specifically. But you know, that you're not going to be able to go to a commercial gallery and see this kind of work. It's very partisan, because I'm partisan. I believe very, very deeply that it's not just, there's no equivalence between left and right. There's right and wrong. And that if you're interested in seeing work that presents what I consider to be the right side of the divide that's happening today, then this is where you'll see it.